Carefrontation is a very important part of the expressions of love, not confrontation, not tough love. You can do this in a very empathic way that has none of the con in it, but just the care. 98% of parents confess that they have screamed bloody murder at their young kids. That problem of parental triggering is huge. These kids, they do better in school because by focusing on others in their meditation, they realize that they have something to actually study for, not me, myself, and I. And then the kids bring it home to the family.
What's your experience of transferring some of these ideas into the workplace?
By fact, Sir John, maybe we could call it the Institute for Creative Altruism. He said, no, let's call it the Institute for Pure Unlimited Love, up to $8.9 million.
And we are live for another episode of Being Human. I'm delighted to say I'm here with Mr. Stephen Post. Stephen is the president and co-founder of the Institute for Research on Pure Unlimited Love and the author of the book, Pure Unlimited Love, The Science and 7 Paths to Inner Peace. He's also director of the Center for Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care and Bioethics at the Renaissance School of Medicine at Stony Brook. Stephen, huge, warm welcome to Being Human.
Well, I am so grateful to be with you. It is an honor indeed, a special honor.
Yeah, and what an energizing title. I mean, just saying those words has already filled me up. You know, just having the idea of pure unlimited love is wonderful, and I'm so excited to have you here and to be able to dive into your work and perspectives. And as with all my guests, I love to start at the beginning, and I know particularly from you, having read at least some of Pure Unlimited Love, that you've got a great origin story with all of this. But tell us a little bit about your background and growing up and how you first started to wander down this path towards Pure Unlimited Love.
Yes, I will spare you the more embarrassing moments. But as a teenager up in New Hampshire at St. Paul's Preparatory School, very much modeled after the British traditions, I was a very engaged student of world religions. And while the other people there were off playing ice hockey and banging their heads against wooden walls, I was typically walking through the woods, reading scriptures and philosophy and enjoying teaching or tutoring at a school across the street, which was filled with French Canadian youngsters who had very little. And it turns out that I enjoyed that more than anything else I was doing up there in Concord, New Hampshire. And I determined that that was my calling fairly early on. And there's a lot more to that, but I've always stayed with that. And I started writing on the theme of love, actually love in the work of St. Augustine. That was my senior project there at St. Paul's. And I went on and did many things in science, endocrinology, immunology. But then I went off to the University of Chicago Divinity School and Department of Psychology, and was honored to work with Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi.
Oh, the Mr. Flow.
Mr. Flow, when he was doing ecological momentary assessment, I was his helper. And he would often teach in the Divinity School because when you get in those flow moments, you lose sense of time and place. And he felt that it was fairly mystical and a source of great happiness for most people. So I was honored to be at Chicago for a number of years, taught in the medical school, taught in the core humanities program. And then I went off to Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is a beautiful place. And I've been on this kick of teaching in medical schools, although I'm not an MD. for about 40 years.
Mm. So the first question that comes to mind is, what did your parents get right to raise a kid with such a deep interest in love from such an early age?
Well, it may have been entirely remedial. I'm not sure. But, I had this sense of calling. And I definitely knew in that summer of 1969 that I wanted to be teaching in the Bronx. But my mother and my father were dead set against that because they felt it was too dangerous a location. I knew it was perfectly fine, and I had to pull some strings to get the opportunity, but I was losing the argument. I was supposed to be going to Swarthmore College, and my mother was threatening me with withdrawing any tuition support. My father was supporting her. And so finally I relented and I said, Dad, if I can't have this summer job, what can I do? And my father, who was the president of a department store on Fifth Avenue, W&J Sloan, he said, I have just the thing for you. You can work in Bill DeBono's lampshade factory. And Bill DeBono was a cigar smoking entrepreneur. He had his factory, and I started driving out there, um, working between two very large Italian women cutting cardboard. And after 2 weeks of this, I decided that I was not going to stick with it. So I drove my dad's secondhand gray Mercedes 190, which had seen a few better days, um, out to the factory and out to my friends in West Hampton Beach, which is on the eastern end of Long Island. And that night at 11 o'clock, I made the decision. I said goodbye to my friends and I drove west. I drove through New York. I drove over the George Washington Bridge, and I went out on Route 80 because there was a wonderful sign that said Route 80 West. And I intuited that I wanted to go west. And I was thinking in the middle of Pennsylvania about 4 a.m. that maybe I would do a U-turn over the Midway and get back home and restore my wonderful reputation. However, as fate would have it, the generator broke. And when the generator breaks in an old Mercedes, it goes no place. So I was able barely to get off on the right corner of the road. And what was I to do? There were no cell phones, no pay phones, even at that time, available. So I took a piece of paper out of the glove compartment. And this is a confession, by the way. Okay. I'm unembarrassable. I pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil, and I wrote a note to the Pennsylvania State Police. Please return this car to Henry A.V. Post, 44 Davison Lane East, West Islip, New York, 516-669-5655, from his son, Stephen, who no longer works in the lampshade factory. And then I put my thumb out and I got a ride and eventually made my way out to California. And that's how my origin story began, because I knew that I was not headed for the ordinary career of just fitting in. I wanted to do something a little more ingenuity, in creative and intuitive. And that's how it worked out.
Right. And back to my question, I can't help but feeling you did you have a sense of support that you would be okay? Was there something internally that allowed you to be, that confident that it would all be okay?
I had a sense that it would be okay, but I was very mindful, very meditative early on in life. I was prayerful in an Episcopalian fashion. And I thought that I had a
Sorry,
calling.
what does prayerful in an Episcopalian fashion mean?
That's not to say that it was overly intense,
Okay.
more peaceful and relaxed. I felt that somehow I had a calling and that my calling was to be a teacher. And I've maintained that for the last 40 years, taking care of my family nicely. And I'm still at it. No indication of retirement that I can see.
Right.
So I have felt synchronicity has always been a big theme in my life. That's one of Carl Jung's concepts, and it fits
Yeah.
into the book. That somehow we're more loved in this universe than we realize, and that at certain points, the right person at the right time with the right thing to say comes into our path, and our job is to respond creatively to them. So I've had a very good run with synchronicity. I still believe heavily in synchronicity, what Jung called uncaused causality, with a capital U and a capital C, not normal cause and effect, but something that involves a higher wisdom than our own.
Right. And you were experiencing them as you'd chosen this path to follow your calling, which is one of the 7 paths you outline in the book.
Yes,
Yeah.
follow your calling. And of course, you've got to try to find it first. And it may change a little bit over the course of a lifetime, but don't be diverted by something a little more prestigious or maybe something that pays a little more money. Stick with what you feel spiritually and intuitively is your calling in life. And it will work out. At least it worked out in my case. And I talk about Chagall, the great artist, my favorite artist, who lived in that small Russian town. And he was 17. His dad insisted that he take over the family business of pickling herring. But Chagall had an intuition that he had a larger destiny. So he ran away to St. Petersburg, lived on the streets, I might add. And finally, when he was sleeping in an alley on an old pillow of some kind, he was looking up into the sky and he saw a blue angel descend. And he felt that this was the color of love. And the next day, he did his first great painting, The Apparition, which was a blue angel. And if you look at all the great Chagall windows, whether it's at the United Nations or wherever it might be, in Israel, in the hospitals, it's always got the blue angel. When he died, he was in his studio outside of Paris painting a blue angel.
Mm.
And so Picasso once quoted as said that Chagall must have an angel running around his brain, and that's probably true.
Yeah.
So I like that idea that people have to struggle to stay true to their callings.
Right. And so I've got 2 children. I got 2 8-year-old boys, and I certainly did not follow a calling. If you'd have asked me what my calling was when I was in my early 20s, I just said, I don't know. I would have had no clue. I wouldn't have even known how to start approaching that question. I was purely thinking in terms of status and money and having enough money to enjoy myself at the weekend. So how do we raise kids that have an ability to intuit what their calling is, even have an interest in that question, and then have the fortitude to ultimately follow it?
Well, the first chapter of the book, May You Give and Glow. It's very important in family life to engage your children in volunteer activities so that they can be doing things that are meaningful for others. And that will give them what we sometimes refer to, it's well documented, as the helper's high. They feel meaningful and purposeful in life. They feel that somehow or another there's a destiny in store for them. And having a calling, by the way, is really um, having a lifetime that will allow you to engage in give and glow. And so that's the beauty of having a calling. Now, I'm a big fan of uh, Edison, Thomas Edison, who grew up in Ohio, and he was somewhat cognitively limited. He was thrown out of school at age 12. This is in Milan, Ohio, outside of Cleveland. And he went home to the farm. He was very sad. And his mother said to him, Thomas, go into the barn and you can tinker with things and be inventive. And then she said, you can even be a light to the world. And he became that, obviously.
Yeah.
So the thing is that a lot of education teaches us to fit in, but not to really discover our callings. And I'm a believer that education can do so much more for people in that sense of allowing them, enabling them to discover who they are and whose they are. So this is my my sense of what you can do with your kids. Now, my kids, they sound a little bit like you. I have a daughter who's almost 40 now, and she finally did discover herself, but she had to volunteer a lot in life and try out different paths. And she finally came out with something that is very suitable for her. And then I have a 30-year-old son who's very locked in and is doing very good work. But you have to take great pride when young people in this time, in this day and age, are able to find their callings and stick with them because, it's so difficult. Housing is so expensive. The cost of living is so expensive. And it's easy for them to give up on their callings and their entrepreneurship, if you will, and just walk down the path of, shall we say, free things.
Right. What do you mean? Expand on that. Three things.
Well, our wonderful new mayor of New York, who is a dyed-in-the-wool socialist and does not encourage people to strike out on their own. Maybe he'll be better than I think, but I don't know. I'm not sure. But I think a lot of people have just given up on their entrepreneurship because they feel that they'll never be able to get a house. When I was in my 20s, I could actually buy a starter home for, $30,000 easily.
My dad bought our second house with his overdraft.
Yeah. And now it would cost you, $500,000 in the New York area or in LA, even more. And so naturally, young people are despairing. And I think that's a major problem because if they feel that level of hopelessness in their lives, how will they ever discover their creativity and their beauty?
Yeah. Yeah. Which is why you can understand there's such a draw for somebody with more of a socialist message right now.
Oh, yes, very much so. And so that's what's happening, actually. There are many young people, I know them here, who are being very devoted to medicine and somewhat entrepreneurial, but mainly they're just very compassionate and very committed to loving their patients. But then there are lots of others who are out there doing nothing, wasting their time and feeling that there's no future for them. And you can't blame them too much. Some of them are actually quite talented, but they have not been told seriously that, like everyone else, they have gifts and talents that they can develop and utilize to benefit identifiable constituencies of people. And maybe somebody along the line told them that they didn't have any of these talents or gifts. So they despaired, they lost hope, and felt de-dignified. So this will shock you. One of the things I like to do, even on the streets of New York City, is walk up to people occasionally, not regularly, but just occasionally, who are on the street and who look like they're going no place and have nothing to do. And maybe they're somewhat troublemakers. I don't know. But I'll say, do you realize that you are a miracle of the universe and a wonder of creation? And I'm going to tell you why. And we talk about it. And they're freaked out, of course. But in some cases, it really helps them because no one ever told them that before.
Yeah. What a beautiful act. And I wrote down something from your book. Most people are suffering to some extent for some deep reason that we know nothing about. So we must always be kind, because being anything less does a lot of hidden damage. But
Yes.
most people are suffering to some extent for some deep reason, and that is true.
That's a quote attributed to the comedian Robin Williams of Mork and Mindy fame
Yeah.
and many such things. He grew up, I knew him a little bit. He grew up just north of Detroit, and his father was an executive for the great automobile companies up there. They had a big mansion. He had no siblings, and his mother was always away. His father was always at work. So what did he do? He had huge armies of little 1-inch high soldiers, and they would go into major battles. He would actually be reading about the Napoleonic Wars, about even Churchill's father or grandfather, who had done so much at Waterloo. And he would imitate these battles. He would create dialogues, and he would move these soldiers around very interestingly. And that was his life. And so when you wonder why it was that he could improvise the way he did,
Ah,
that's how it happened. He was improvising since he was a little kid, and he didn't have any friends. And he was suffering, even though he was incredibly hilarious. I mean, my goodness, hilaritas on wheels, full of energy, but he was also suffering.
yeah.
So he said that everybody is suffering in some way that we know nothing of. Now, that may be too dramatic. You know, the Buddha thought that everyone was suffering. I'm not as committed to the idea that everyone is suffering, but I do think that people do suffer quite a bit. The book, The Road Less Traveled by C. Everett Koop, by the psychiatrist, what is his name? It's slipping me. But he begins that great book, F. Scott, it begins with, you'll have to edit this. It begins with, life is difficult.
Right.
And I think that's true. M. Scott Peck, life is difficult. And that's the same kind of thing that I think Robin Williams was getting at. So this is why we need mirth. We need mirth. We need to laugh. And I feel as though nowadays the politics have gotten so intense and so divisive and so polarizing that we've forgotten how to laugh.
Yeah.
And that's why on my wheel of love, which is a big part of the book, I don't just include compassion, listening, and many other things as expressions of love, but also mirth.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I'm thinking I want to print it out for my kids in my kitchen. Yeah, it's a wonderful image and, you know, reminder of what we can do.
Yes, and there are so many different expressions of love. So my definition of love, which I take from a Chicago
I'm just going to
university.
bring it up now for us.
Okay, yeah, I'm ahead of you. But a University of Chicago psychiatrist who said that when the happiness and security of another is as real, or perhaps you want to say meaningful to you as your own, and sometimes, in the case of your kids, for example, more so, you love that person. That's a pretty good definition. It doesn't depend on Greek or other ancient languages. It's fairly commonsensical and makes perfect sense. And so the question for me is, what are the expressions of that love? What do we do in everyday life, in family roles, in leadership roles, in the community, to make love into a reality? And I'm always asking myself, so what does this person need? Maybe
Right.
they're very creative, but they're in a slow period. They're stuck. So I want to listen to them and maybe give them a few helpful hints. There's also the word carefrontation,
Yes.
which you must be interested in. That's from M. Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled. Scotty Peck, who I knew very well, was a graduate of Case Medical School. And I came there after he had long since moved on. But we communicated by letter and phone calls. And he said, you need a concept of love that can be utilized when you've got to try to keep people on track and straighten them out, and their behavior is a little bit off kilter. So he said, why don't you take my word, carefrontation? And I accepted that offer. So carefrontation is a very important part of the expressions of love, not confrontation, not tough love, because that's kind of crude, but carefrontation. And it's hard to be successful in carefrontation. A lot of counselors are very good at carefrontation. He obviously was. Scotty Peck certainly was, but it's not an easy thing to do well. So that's an expression of love. Love is sometimes going to be carefrontational.
So tell us the difference between tough love and carefrontation.
Well, in carefrontation, you are always going to be respectful. I'm in a department of preventive medicine. You're always going to be respectful of others who really have some remedial work to do in some aspect of their life, their health, mental and physical, and so forth. So you don't want to just lay it on them in some aggressive way. You want to ask them, well, are you interested in changing? And let them have their freedom, their autonomy, express themselves, and then reflect that back. Did I hear you right? And then ask them, so how would you like to get started? Let them determine that.
Right.
And then ask them, this is standard behavior modification. You can write that down on a piece of paper and have them do that, even if it's just a line or two.
Yeah.
And then invite them, come back in 2 or 3 weeks and let's see how you're doing. And so you can do this in a very empathic, emotionally supportive way that has none of the con in it, but just the care.
Yeah.
And that's effective. That's how, when you get someone who's really, really good at helping people change destructive behaviors and self-destructive behaviors, that's the way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right. And I like the distinction between tough love and carefrontation, because they might come from the same place, right? I desire
Yeah.
to help this person and see them do better in the world.
Yes.
But taking this careful approach, this is
Yeah.
can get us to the same end without as much suffering.
Yeah. And the tough love thing, which was very popular 15 or 20 years ago, it has its limits because it easily invites abrasive, harsh, screaming behavior. There's a book out now called Scream-Free Parenting. And Harvard's Department of Education did a project on it. It turns out that 98% of parents, at least in the US, confess that they have screamed bloody murder at their young kids, including toddlers. And that's not good for those toddlers, because we now know from studies at Yale and at Oxford and elsewhere that young kids, toddlers, 18 months, 1 year, they do have a sense of empathy toward others. They're not these cretins that have to be controlled, but with some heavy veneer of threat, as Freud and the behaviorists believed. But in fact, it turns out that Rousseau was more or less correct with Emile, that there is a kind of natural born empathy and kindness in the child. Now, the job of the parent is to push the right buttons, not the wrong buttons. And if you keep threatening these kids and telling them that they're bound for hell, it puts them at a deficit. And so they don't have adequate attachment. And when they grow up in their 20s, for example, they're more likely to be identified by their peers as less caring.
Yeah.
And they're more subject in midlife to mental illnesses and to physical illnesses like diabetes. And so how we nurture that natural caring capacity in the child makes a big difference. So that's why there's a chapter called How to Raise a Caring Child.
Yeah. And I think it's rightly placed as one of the seven paths, because when my peace is most disrupted, it is in parenting.
Yeah.
And I hands up, I'm one of that 98%. I cannot say that I
Me too.
brought them to 8 years old without having ever screamed at either of them. And as I hear you speak and reflect on that, perhaps for me at least, part of it is, some misconceived idea about how I need to discipline them. But the number one factor is me getting triggered, right?
Yes.
Something they've done has caused me deep pain. It's
Yes.
opened up an old wound. And the way that I've dealt with that, reacted to that, is to have lashed out in anger. I'm not sort of premeditatively thinking, oh, how do I discipline this kid in this situation?
Right. That problem of parental triggering is huge. And if we could do something about that, it would be great. So the chapter, May You Raise a Caring Child, has a lot of practical tips. We funded $4 million of research with the best people in America and a little bit in the UK on how to succeed in raising a caring child. And one thing that comes out very clear, you want to have that little list of to-dos, of positive psychological terms written on cardboard perhaps, and then posted on your refrigerator door with a magnet. And it could say kindness, forgiveness. It could say gratitude, and some things that everybody, including the kids, have agreed to. And that creates a cultural center in your family because honestly speaking, there's so much negativity out there. I mean, my God, read the papers, or just listen to the news, and you don't know what to do about it. So you have to create an alternative space. Also, there's a lot there about monitoring your kids' life online. So here at this medical school, I hired the first physician documentary filmmaker, a Stanford MD, and she did a wonderful documentary that caught on all over the world called Screen Agers, which really documents honestly the hell that families go through when they try to monitor and get their kids doing something a little more constructive than locking in on some questionable website. And, even AI, there's a psychiatrist at the University of California, San Francisco, which is a famous medical center. And he has coined the term, which can be Googled by listeners, AI psychosis. And there have been cases now, quite a number of them, dozens at least, of adolescents who had no history of mental illness. However, when they were locked into the AI, and the AI can ask them, because the AI, by the way, has no love, it's a machine, has asked them, what's bothering you? What's troubling you deeply? And then the kid will say, well, it's this and that. And then the dialogue will ensue. And after a couple of months of that, the AI will walk them down a path to suicide. And that's a serious problem. So that now there are 7 parents suing Google because of adolescent suicides. And the guy who got the Nobel Prize for AI, Henson, he quit Google, and he's now back at the University of Toronto in Ontario. And I actually met him once upon a time at a Templeton meeting. And, he feels very despondent because he doesn't think this is really helping young people learn basic positive skills in life. And, the intergenerational flow of positive psychology is not getting down to them, if you will. So that's a big problem.
Yeah, I'd seen other studies about, and this is even before the advent of AI, the
Yes.
lack of empathy,
Yes.
and empathy is decreasing in younger people.
Yes.
And of course, the rise in anxiety and depression and in suicide. I mean, yeah, we're definitely at
Yeah.
an age where kindness and people experiencing pure, unlimited love has never been in greater need.
Yeah. Well, there's a wonderful writer. He's a social scientist at NYU. And his name, you may have heard of him, Jonathan Haidt.
Yes.
And he has a huge movement, is now turning international, about getting kids off the internet in their schools and in their homes. And it's working out quite profoundly. One of the things, by the way, that we funded at my institute in the public schools in Baltimore, Maryland, this is many years ago, this is probably 25 years ago, was to have young kids in first, second, and third grade doing mindfulness meditation, because that slows down their negative emotions. It helps them to discover a safe emotional space in everyday life. They get along better. They stop the fighting, which can be very, very significant. And, and they even started an office of mindfulness in the school system. So if you're a teacher and the kids are really falling out and doing dastardly things like gremlins of some kind, you don't send them to the principal's office. You send them to the mindfulness office. And there's a nonprofit that has offices in 30 cities on the East Coast of the US, which just concentrates on teaching mindfulness in the schools. And these kids, they do better in school because by focusing on others in their meditation, they realize that they have something to actually study for, not me, myself, and I. Up at St. Paul's in New Hampshire, we had a wonderful emblem. At the top of it was a pelican, which is the medieval Christian sign for deep love of others.
Oh.
And it's a fairly extreme symbol because the reason it was chosen in the medieval period was because pelicans, if their offspring were desperately in need of food, would pluck the veins from their chests to provide. So it's a pretty deep symbol. And it appears a lot in Oxford and Cambridge, by the way. So then below that is the crossed sword, the love that does justice, the love that is sensitive to social inequalities. Something MLK, Martin Luther King, wrote a lot about. He wrote a whole book called The Love That Does Justice.
Right.
And then finally, thirdly, down below, and this is quite beautiful, I think, is the open book, the Libris, open. So the reason why you studied in my school when I was a kid was because of love and justice and wanting to serve some needful constituency through your learning. And I think that's important. So I'd like to see us get back to love in the schools as a center of learning. I'm not saying, bring in some orthodox religion, but bring in mindfulness and spirituality to uplift the kids and help them find greater meaning in their activities, because otherwise they're just sitting there fitting in. They're not discovering their callings or their deeper purpose. They're just fitting in like anybody else, and they will fit in at their work and they will have a very dreary life.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. We just had a guest on from, I don't know if you've heard of Ubiquity University.
Yes, I have.
Right. And they run a post-grad program,
Uh-huh.
but it's founded in
Yep.
meditation.
Yeah, David Lorimer.
I don't know if
Some great
he's
people,
there.
great people there.
And and so he's transforming the higher education and further this
Yeah.
through this approach. And absolutely, why not have it in school? So the purpose is to transform oneself,
Yes,
and the knowledge that we acquire then becomes integrated into this transformational process, not an end in itself.
that's right. And then the kids, at least on the East Coast, who are involved in this, they're actually encouraged to bring it home to the family.
Right.
And then the family begins to get interested in this because they see this transformation that you refer to. And it's a beautiful thing in the neighborhood too. So there's a lot to be said for this. I think we need, you can't have church in a public school. There are laws about church and state that apply to that, but there are no laws against practicing spirituality of this sort, which is really not specific, doesn't even invoke God, quote unquote. But in these meditational moments, in at least the Eastern traditions, Buddhism, for example, people will begin to be opened up to the idea that there may be some sort of universal consciousness, and there's no law against that.
Handily. What's your experience of transferring some of these ideas into the workplace?
Well, I get up in the morning. I can only speak for myself. I get up in the morning pretty early. I'm usually up about 5:30. And that's because the old ancient Jewish rabbis always thought that the early morning, they wrote treatises about this, was the best time to meditate. Why? I don't know about you, but when I get up in the morning, I have no idea what time it is. I have no idea if I'm in New York or Cleveland or California. I have to orient myself anew. Also, there's been none of the sort of proverbial negativity. Nobody has screamed bloody murder because I stopped at a yellow light, whatever. And so it's a wonderfully fresh time. And the rabbis said that because the divine, however you want to define that, I am, whatever your language game is beyond time and place. Early in the morning, when you have that feeling, you have better odds, a better probability of having a deeply spiritual experience. So I do that. I meditate, I'm mindful, I relax myself, I breathe. And then after about 20 minutes, following the Dalai Lama's advice, I begin to imagine the encounters that I will have over the course of the day, because I'm right now running a center in a medical school and even a division of medicine and society. And I know I'm going to encounter lots of different people over the course of the day. Many times I've encountered them before, and I have a sense of where they're at, of what they need. Maybe somebody's son is relapsing into an opioid addiction. So I know I need to listen very attentively, not come up with any knee-jerk solutions, but also be compassionate and give this parent and physician hope. Sometimes I know that a physician has made a dreadful error that resulted in the death of a patient. And I've heard about this and I've seen them kind of dragging their feet, and that's okay. But they need to know, I'm going to quote Martin Luther King, those who make no mistakes make nothing.
Mm.
And that's especially true in medicine because you're learning by making mistakes. Hopefully not too many that are life-threatening, but it does happen, especially with medical students. And so I want them to be able to forgive themselves and to know that they can carry on and have beautiful careers. So I know how to approach that person. I may have someone I know I'm going to encounter who is thinking about leaving medicine because she doesn't feel like she fits in, that she just comes from a very simple background in Queens somewhere and doesn't have the sort of educational background or money that some of the other students might have. And so I know she's going to show up at my door at 2:00. And I determine beforehand that I'm going to cancel all my appointments after 2:00 and just spend time with her. And my wife and I would actually drive into Queens. She took a year off and did creative writing for us, which can be very therapeutic. And we would meet with her at a restaurant in Queens and spend time with her. And eventually she came back to medical school and is very successful now as a clinician, not in New York, but in a nearby state. So you have to be anticipating the forms of love that people needed. This young lady needed loyalty. Loyalty is a form of love. She felt that nobody was being loyal to her. Nobody was sticking with her. And so when I came into work that day, I said, I'm going to stick with this young lady. And it worked. So it's the forms of love that I think about a lot. And that includes mirth.
Yeah.
I believe in mirth. I mean, I'm known for mirthful moments because people have forgotten mirth. Mirth, by the way, just really means laughter.
Right.
An ancient word. And you would know it, but not everybody would. So it basically means that we've forgotten how to laugh.
Yeah.
We've gotten so heavy and so serious and so adversarial that we need more mirth. And I always do clean, tasteful, uplifting mirth. So for example, this is quick. What do you do if you are agnostic? That's the theological side.
I don't know. What do you do if you're agnostic?
But you also have dyslexia and insomnia. That's the medical side. The answer is you're up all night wondering about the existence of dog. And so I made a whole room break out laughing at that not too long ago. And it wasn't derisive. It wasn't at anyone's expense. I don't like that kind of humor. But we have studies. There's a whole center at UCLA Medical School on psychoneuroimmunology and how laughter frees us from stress and allows us to get away from those protracted high levels of stress hormones, which turn your metabolites into fatty acids, mess up your vascular system, slow wound healing, and also mess up your hippocampus so you don't retain short-term memories easily. And it's one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease, hippocampal atrophy.
Mm.
So the constant pressure and stress, W.H. Auden, the great poet, wrote a wonderful book called The Age of Anxiety. And I love Auden. He hung out at a school north of Oxford. And he had a big following in Oxford, but the great thing about Auden is that he realized that he could have these moments when somehow something very beautiful, he would call it divine mind. He was not an active member of the Church of England, but later on, after this experience, he became more spiritually oriented. And let me just read this paragraph. It's my favorite paragraph from Auden. One fine night in June 1933, I was sitting on a lawn after dinner with 3 colleagues, 2 women and 1 man. We like each other well enough, but we're certainly not intimate friends. Incidentally, we had not drunk any alcohol. We were talking casually about everyday matters when quite suddenly and unexpectedly something happened. I felt myself invaded. That's a metaphor to use. I felt myself invaded by a power which, though I consented to it, was irresistible and certainly not mine. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what it means to love one's neighbor as oneself. My personal feelings toward my colleagues were unchanged. They were not intimate friends, they were still colleagues, but I felt their existence as themselves to be of infinite value and rejoiced in it. That's page 141 if you're looking for it. And there are many similar kinds of things. I talk about so you're up around you're around Cambridge, Trinity College. You go into that college library, and right in the middle of it are the notebooks of Ramanujan, the great Indian mathematician who's never studied math. And he was from a sort of a small town in southern India.
Yeah, I saw that. I think I saw the movie about him. Yeah.
Oh, the movie, the Man Who Knew Infinity, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's a great movie. And, lo and behold, he's at the foot of his goddess and he's in these deep meditational states and he receives these algorithms and he writes them down in the dirt with his finger. And later on, he comes down and he collects them in a notebook. And the great mathematician of around 1900, G.H. Hardy, got a hold of one of these formulas and he invited Ramanujan to Cambridge, which was not easy for Ramanujan, obviously, but he didn't think he had to prove anything because his stuff came straight from the consciousness of the universe. And it's now considered to be really those notebooks, the foundation of quantum physics, which is really interesting. And just go to that Trinity College library where Oliver Cromwell, by the way, was a student.
I didn't know that.
And you can see those and look at them, and they're very, very interesting. So a lot of times creativity, even Maxwell, Maxwell's equations, he claimed that he received those in dreams. So this is where I have that chapter on May You Know the One Mind. I studied with Sir John Eccles at the University of Chicago, who got the Nobel Prize for figuring out how brain cells communicated, the synapses. And he always told me, he said, don't ever believe that mind is nothing but matter. I'm quoting from him, that mind is derived somehow entirely from brain cells and from tissue. Not so. He said, mind utilizes the brain as a platform, but it's not the source of mind. And then he would tell me that neuroscientists in the future would try to reduce mind to matter. But all of our great spiritual traditions, East and West, say that it's mind before matter. And he truly believed that. As do all of your friends from Ubiquity University.
Right. Well, I've been on a run in this podcast of all of the research. It's now coming into science. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Where we're discovering, all these proofs that consciousness exists
yes,
beyond the brain.
So more than 50% of philosophers of mind believe this view, mind before matter. And I think it's so important because otherwise, what are we? And I think we need to realize that mind is a gift. Sir John Templeton, the great investor and my great friend for 20 years, he once wrote a note to all the people who invested in the Templeton Fund, which was the most successful at that time. It was a Christmas note. He said, I want you to remember that your mind is a gift. And what he meant by that was it's not just derived, and you need to treasure it really as your participation in a higher presence in the universe. So I'm a big believer in that, and I have my little experiences in life here and there, which I won't go into, but I'm convinced.
Come on, give us you can't leave us hanging. What's a taster of a download you've had from the One Mind?
Okay, well, I'll give you a quick story, and this is in the chapter on calling. So after I ran away when I was 17, like Chagall, and spent the summer in San Francisco, I drew a very bad draft number, and I was headed for Vietnam. So I called the people at Reed College in Portland, Oregon, a notorious place. And I went up there because they admitted me, even though it was late and I'd already turned them down. And Steve Jobs, by the way, was a student there.
Oh, yeah.
And he slept on the floor and he read the autobiography of a yogi.
Right.
An interesting guy. And so I was in the Reed College coffee shop one night in late January. Now in Oregon, it doesn't get freezing cold, but it can get slushy. And this guy came bounding into the coffee shop, and it's about 9 o'clock, and he said, "My name is Andy, and I've got a brand new Harley Davidson shovelhead motorcycle, the fastest motorcycle in the world now. Who wants to go for a ride?" And because my executive function, my frontal lobes were obviously not in place yet, they don't really come into their own until you're 25, which is why women are ahead of guys in a lot of ways. And so I stood up and I said, "I'll go." And I went out onto the parking lot and I jumped on his motorcycle, and he took off and he hit 180 miles an hour.
Wow.
Really in about 2 minutes. He went through every stop sign, every red light in Portland. And then he hung a left. He headed south on the Pacific Coast Highway. And I was screaming. I thought I was dead. He had this shrieking voice. The cold rain was blowing his cheeks red. And he knew I was desperate. I thought I was honestly about to die. And then lo and behold, miraculously, he did this wild, Evel Knievel U-turn over the Midway, and he went back to Portland, and he dropped me off exactly where he picked me up. I got off the motorcycle and I staggered across the bridge, which was over a ravine, to my old dormitory. And I never picked up the payphone. There were no cell phones back then. I mean, Jobs was a student there. He hadn't invented anything yet. So there was a payphone on the wall in the foyer, and I just felt nudged. I didn't see anything. I wasn't hallucinating visually, but I felt pushed from my right shoulder to pick up that phone. And I picked it up and I said, "Hello." Now, remind you, it's 11 at night Pacific Coast time. So it's 2 a.m. in New York. I said, "Hello." And it was my mother. And she said, "Stevie, thank God you're alive." I had the worst premonition. I woke up, I was sweating. And I thought you were dead. And I said, "Mom, I thought I was dead too." And we talked about this. She was a bit of an Irish Catholic and somewhat mystical, and she had all kinds of crazy stories about how dreams would save her ancestors from Cromwell. All of that stuff. And I have nothing. I like Cromwell. Cromwell, I think, was good in a lot of ways. Don't get me wrong. But at any rate, we talked about the idea of a consciousness that is beyond place. And we agreed with that somehow the fact that being 3,000 miles away from her and separated by 2 or 3 major mountain ranges, she could still have an impression what was going on with me. And it turns out, actually, that there have been studies on this done by people in the UK. And that mother-child connection in times of imperilment is very prolific. And in fact, the guy who developed brainwaves, a person named Berger, the reason he discovered them was because when he was in World War I, he was almost run over by a cannon. And his sister had this incredible premonition that her brother had died. And so they later debriefed, and this convinced him. He became a neurologist from a famous German university. It convinced him that there's something very magical about the way the mind is part of a larger mind. And so we're all connected in that deep sense, not just biologically, but with regard to consciousness. And so he went ahead and he discovered what were called Berger waves, and still are called Berger waves in some clinics, but they're more likely to be called alpha waves. And EEGs derived from that experience that he had with his sister.
Okay.
Yeah, you can Google this. It's
Yeah.
there. It's part of medical history. And so this idea of the brainwave, it was such a strange idea. He was actually, young Berger, as a neurologist, was persecuted for this because people thought he was crazy for thinking in these terms. But eventually, a Hindu neuroscientist who was taken seriously at that time in the UK came to his defense. So this is the beauty of the idea of the one mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know if you're familiar with the telepathy tapes and the phenomenon of, we had Diane Hennessy, one of the scientists
Really?
on the show, right? And she's describing all of the research she's been involved with, proving these mind-to-mind connections, especially between autistic kids and their carers, but in other scenarios.
Yeah. Well, I've written books about dementia, and with Johns Hopkins Press. One is called Dignity for Deeply Forgetful People. I don't actually like the word dementia because it invites derogatory expressions: gone, shell, husk, etc. But deeply forgetful is more inclusive. And I have a chapter on neuroscience and dementia that's entitled, "Is Grandma Still There?"
Mm.
And I never have the audacity to say that she's gone, because I think she may be opaque. But underneath this breakdown in communication, I say the same thing with autism. There is still something preserved. She still has a soul. She still connects with this universal consciousness. And it can be very surprising. So there's now studies being done on paradoxical lucidity among people with dementia, where primary caregivers, half of them report these perplexing and amazing moments when somebody who's been defunct, non-communicative, will just sort of come back into themselves, sometimes prompted by personalized music and so forth, but oftentimes just sporadically. And it's great for the caregivers because they feel that, she's not a husk, she's not a shell, she's not dead. There's a lot of value and meaning in what I'm doing as a caregiver.
Yeah.
And that makes a difference to them psychologically. So they're much less prone to depression, which is at a little higher level among caregivers because it's a 24/7 thing.
Yeah. Yeah. One question that comes to me is, and this relates to both this concept of connecting to the one mind and having an experience of that, but also to what you were speaking to earlier in terms of developing a loving orientation to those in our lives and incorporating that perhaps in our meditation at the start of the day. What do you say to people who have not got started on this path whatsoever? Oh, I tried meditation. I can't sit still. How do you expect me to sit with my thoughts for 20 minutes? But for the people who, and I was this guy in my 20s. I remember I'd go to yoga classes, and when it came to Shavasana at the end where you're supposed to lie down, I just immediately walked up. I couldn't cope for even 60 seconds just to lie there and not do anything. What, what do we, what's your advice to those people?
Part of it is cultural. So we did a study on widows and widowers who had been happily married for many years, and now their loved one is gone. And they typically go through a period of grief and bereavement. Now, it turns that the ones who get through that process more quickly and in a more enduring fashion are the ones who can self-report helping activities, volunteering, and so forth in their lives. So we got a call from the New York Society of Widows and Widowers. There is such a thing. And I was invited to go in and give a talk at a hotel on Fifth Avenue somewhere. And it was a pretty big ballroom full of people. And I was emphasizing the intrinsic benefits that we get from being givers. It's not transactional, but people feel they can cope better with loss and disappointment. They feel happier, they feel healthier, and a lot of other things, more resilient. And so I gave a talk about this, and there was a guy in the back of the room, and he started frantically waving his hands. And he said, "I don't care what you say, buddy. I don't do nothing for nothing." And I responded, I said, "Are you happy?" He said, "No, I've never been happy." And I said, "Maybe we need to work on this." So we talked for a while, and a lot of people chimed in. But the point is that the ideology of our culture and some of its elements is so transactional that we forget that we can just lighten up and do things for free. And I think it's so important to have that. So that's part of the problem. And part of the reason I wrote this book is for people to realize the intrinsic benefits. May you give and glow.
Yeah.
There you have it. May you give and glow. And there's so much evidence for that. But also, I think that mindfulness, however you do that, I don't lie down on the floor. I do this sitting down, and I watch my breathing for a bit, and I try to be prayerful as well. I kind of combine things. But, I'm very influenced by the Dalai Lama, who says that compassion is not an internal emotional state that makes you feel good about yourselves. Rather, it's an activity. And you should always be asking yourself, how can I mitigate or relieve the suffering of individuals around me? And so it's an action. And I think that's important. It's not just an emotional or a physical state for you as an agent, but it also includes how you as an agent utilize that mindset to the benefit of others. Even if it's difficult to do that, there's usually some little thing you can do. But if not, at least you have the intention of relieving suffering.
Right. Yeah. So a better path in for a lot of people may be in voluntary service than sitting down.
Well, you can go up to the top of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, and they've done this. I mean, the Templeton Foundation funded a big project about this with advanced Tibetan meditators, and they would meditate, for 30 days, and this would affect their telomeres and their biochemistry and make them more open to the universe and potentially more compassionate. And that's great. But you can more or less do the same thing without all of that by just doing. That's the James Lang theory of emotions. That's why they say, smile even if you're not happy. You've probably read it. Because the musculature feeds into your emotional centers and eventually into the mesolimbic pathway, and you feel kinder. So either way is fine. But one way is more practical and doesn't involve a trip to Colorado.
Yeah. And is particularly good for people who just can't sit still.
Yeah. And so still, so you should be out there doing stuff.
Well, yeah. Well, no, I've learned to meditate now, but I'm just,
Yeah.
there was definitely a period where that was off the cards.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it took me a while. I'm not one of the, my path to spiritual growth has very much been incremental. Yeah. I've never had one of those experiences where I'm just sort of struck.
Well, mine's been a little uneven too. And sometimes I've had to experience carefrontation directed at me, for sure. Anyway, His Holiness wrote the foreword to this book.
Right. Yes. No, I read it. Yes. I mean, what a coup.
Well, it's not. He's not doing that anymore. He's 90. He had a birthday recently, and he's not traveling. He's getting very much up there in terms of his age. And I'm honored because I think this may be the last foreword that he writes. Can't complain about that.
No. I mean, what an honor, and it's a beautiful book. And I'm not surprised he wanted to write you a foreword.
Most of the things I've written, I'll tell you, some of them have been pretty good. I mean, Why Good Things Happen to Good People is a good book. Dignity for Deeply Forgetful People is a good book. But nothing is as satisfying for me. Actually, this morning I was reading certain sections of this, and I felt the beauty of it. There's some real beauty and some real creativity, and I've never felt that way. Maybe this is my last book. I don't think I have to write another book.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe not.
Well, how much higher can you go? I mean, you've hit pure unlimited love.
Okay. So the final question. So what is love when the happiness and security of another is as real to you as your own or more so? But what is metaphysically pure unlimited love? Now, this is in the introduction, and I attribute this to Dr. Jeffrey Trilling, who was the head of family medicine here in this medical school for many years. I said, Jeff, he's kind of mystical. I said, Jeff, what really is pure unlimited love? I wanted his ideas. And he looked down and he very carefully, slowly said, pure unlimited love is the first thing that you see when you close your eyes for the last time, which gets into, the light and all of that. Yeah. And I thought it was so beautiful that I had to include it.
Yeah. It gives us all something to look forward to.
It does. And I think there is that. And I think we should look forward to it, no matter what shenanigans are going on in everyday life these days.
The Being Human podcast.
And does that mean it's the basis of all?
First Human.
Is the essence of
First Humans,
our existence pure unlimited love?
Coaching.
Yeah. So when Sir John, I was very close to Sir John, and spiritually and intellectually, we were like partners. And he died in 2008 in Lyford Key in Nassau in the Bahamas. And about a week before he died, his wonderful son, Jack Templeton, who was a pediatric trauma surgeon at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, he calls me on my flip phone, which, by the way, are coming back into vogue. And he said, Dad is dying. I said, Jack, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's so sad. Is there anything I can do? And Jack said, well, yes. As a matter of fact, Sir John has a request. I said, what's that? Well, he's dying and he's not going to be able to write his final book. But he thinks maybe if anybody could, you could write it for him. And I had a lot of pause about that because that's pretty audacious. But I said, well, if he really thinks I can do it, did he give you a title? And Jack said, Ultimate Reality is Unlimited Love, in response to your question.
Wow.
And I thought, this is going to be a challenge. So I said, Jack, maybe you could go back to your father and ask him if we could put a question mark after that title. So Jack came back a few minutes later to the flip phone, and he said, yeah, Dad says you can use is ultimate reality, unlimited love, question mark. And I felt greatly relieved because it meant I didn't have to prove anything, knock down, drag out, but I could use plausibility. I could say there's a preponderance of opinion, such and such. And that was a great relief. I did write that book for the Templeton Press, and it had a foreword by Jack Templeton and his wonderful anesthesiologist wife, Pina Templeton, also now deceased. And it included all the great letters I'd gotten from Sir John by fax. He did not email. He thought emailing was no good, but he thought the fax machine was the best thing ever invented. So he would fax me several times a day. And I'll never forget the day he faxed me. He said, Stevie, we need to start an institute to study the highest human experience. And that has to do with love. And we'll call it the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. So I thought about it because I was in a big medical school doing research on Alzheimer's genetics, believe it or not. And I thought, what are my friends going to be thinking about this? And so I faxed back to Sir John. Sir John, maybe we could call it the Institute for Creative Altruism, because altruism is a nice, dry, safe word in genetics and social science and so forth. So he faxed back to me. He said, no, let's call it the Institute for Pure Unlimited Love, up to $8.9 million. And I faxed back, Sir John, I love that title. It jumps right off the page. And we were in business. And we've done so many wonderful programs supporting so many wonderful researchers, wonderful spiritual events of all kinds. And it's a nonprofit, independent 501c3. I've never let it get folded into a university because universities don't understand this stuff. It's too esoteric.
Well, most don't, unless you're at Ubiquity University.
Yeah, exactly right. So I couldn't agree more. So I appreciate the Ubiquity people because they know what the score is. But he was right. Sir John was right because, a couple of years later, we had a big conference in Philadelphia, 800 people from 40 different countries. Maybe a third of them were practitioners of unlimited love, you could call them that, including Dame Cicely Saunders. And you could...
what a job title, practitioner of...
Oh, yeah, that would be it. And then some people who were more philosophical, theological types. And then others who were doing empirical research. Right. So we had that. It went on for a week. And it attracted a whole lot of wonderful people. So Sir John was completely correct in wanting me to be bold because this stuff gets watered down so quickly if you get frightened of what people are going to say. You have to have a little mirth, by the way.
You do. Okay. Go on.
One last story. So I came here from Case Western. I've been there for 20 years. The president of Stony Brook was recruiting me aggressively. And so I had mixed feelings about it, but Stony Brook's a good place. And I had every desire to come here and do a good job. So my wife, my son, at that time, he was about 11 or 12. We stayed at an inn, at a hotel along the North Shore. Goes way back to the Revolutionary War period. And we were in a room that actually was pretty filled with mildew. And it was raining like crazy, big thunderstorm. And my son was getting texts from his friends back in Cleveland talking about the soccer team and asking him where he was, which kind of was difficult for him, understandably. And my wife was worried about the mildew. So it was a tough night for me. And after about an hour of getting screamed at, this was carefrontation. Not quite. Actually, it was even worse. This was actually confrontation.
Right.
And so I decided, I don't know what to do, but we're here and we sold the house. So I'm going to go out in the car and I'm going to find a pizzeria. So I went out and I found Little Joe's Pizzeria and I ordered a pepperoni pizza. And as I was walking in through the foyer, though, there was a newspaper stand. And there was one newspaper that was there. It was called the Three Village Herald. And the headline, the only headline was, "Unlimited love comes to Stony Brook." And of course, everybody reads that thing and nobody knows who I am. This is a cub reporter who'd gone online and she'd done some investigative work. And she even interviewed the dean of the medical school, who's a very famous pediatric nephrologist and the chair of my department. And actually, to their credit, they were fine. And we think he can do what we want him to do. And we're not too worried about this pure unlimited love business. So I was impressed. And the next morning,
he could do what we need him to do in spite of this unlimited love.
Yeah, exactly. The next morning, I came into this school for the first time in my life. And they have escalators that go up from one floor to the next. And I went up an escalator from L2 to L3. And up at the top of L3, I saw a guy with his arms folded. He was very muscular. And he was looking down at me intensely. And I said, "Sir, do I know you?" And he said, "Are you Dr. Post?" This is a very well-known biochemist. And I said, "Yes, sir, I am." And he said, "Are you going to save us?" The first words I heard, that a place is full of Nobel laureates and stuff. And I said, "Well, I'm not sure that, but I think we'll get along." And we talked. He was a violinist. I'm a musician too. So we have had a good friendship. But I called the president, Shirley Kenny, who had recruited me a little later. And I said, "Shirley, did you by any chance see that article in the Three Village Herald? And did you get any response?" And she laughed a little bit. She said, "Yeah, I did get responses. I got calls from emeritus professors." And I asked her, "What did they say?" And she said, "Well, they were mostly male emeritus professors. And they asked me, what kind of love are we talking about?" And we just laughed our way through that. It was a mirthful moment. And that's why I think that mirth is oftentimes an expression of love, because it breaks up all the intensity and the hurt and the negativity, and you just get beyond it in a millisecond. It's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Reminds me of those stories of people who claim to have cured themselves with cancer and all the rest of it just by watching comedy shows.
Well, that's right. Yeah,
true.
yeah. The great book, The Anatomy of an Illness, by Norman Cousins, who was an editor of the New York Review of Books. He laughed himself healthy. Everybody thought he was going to die. And he watched the Three Stooges and all those kinds of things. And he became one of the founders of psychoneuroimmunology and is considered that, and started that center at UCLA, which I mentioned.
Mm.
So laughter sometimes is the best medicine.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to one more path that perhaps we haven't touched on.
Okay.
Just briefly before we close out. May you cherish the gift of nature. What's that about?
So when you go off to meditate in the nearby town here at Port Jefferson, you will find there is a set of wind chimes blowing and making beautiful sound. There's the flow of water through a bamboo chute. There are wonderful greeneries to be seen. And you just feel free in nature to get away from the pressures and the anxieties of the world around you, and you can connect more easily in meditation and prayer with your inner being. There might even be a nice wooden statue of St. Francis nearby. And that's a beautiful thing. So I'm convinced that right now, there is for some people what we're now calling actually nature deficit disorder. That they're so hooked up to the technologies and they're so divorced from the mystery and the beauty and the power of nature that they're not doing very well. I sometimes pop by the psychiatric emergency unit just to see what's going on, especially on a weekend night. And I feel as though so many of these people are just completely divorced from nature. So my RX, my prescription is I ride a ferry from Port Jefferson to Connecticut. It's about an hour and a half one way, and you can get a ticket round trip for $20. And with the beautiful waves and the wonderful sky, and of course the French fries, I'm kidding. But I think getting in touch with nature is vital because after all, that's how we evolved. Our brains didn't evolve to be hooked up 24/7 to these devices.
Yeah.
We evolved in beautiful nature with the birds singing and the sky blue and the rain and the snow and all of that. So I believe that cherishing the gift of nature. Now, I don't think that nature needs to be worshipped. I don't worship nature, but I consider it to be a gift from whatever that higher creative consciousness is. There's so much beauty in nature. And that's what that's about.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad we've included it. And I think it is such an important aspect of health and spiritual growth.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned to you, I had dinner with, I did, Jane Goodall.
Yes.
About 4 weeks ago. She was very wonderful. And, she understood nature so beautifully. When she went out into the wilds to be with the chimpanzees, she wasn't depending on any prior work that was done because all the male primatologists of the 20th century viewed non-human primates as swashbuckling troublemakers to be controlled, if possible, gremlins, if you will. But she just went out there and with her feminist epistemology, she just made observations and recognized, identified, noticed the large extent of empathic behavior and even compassionate behavior for the most vulnerable in these groups. And so she did so much for the world. I really thank Cambridge for Jane Goodall and her family, because when I was growing up, it reflected on my views of human nature. If that's how non-human primates behave, so aren't we primates?
Yeah.
And so you would lose confidence in your own good nature. And, the 20th century, this is one of the reasons I was so excited by starting the Institute. I mean, Sartre, being in nothingness, if anybody even looks at you with kindness, watch out because they're after your wallet. And, then the selfish gene,
Right.
which tells you, if you even think for a moment that you can be authentically generous, think again, because you are what you are metaphysically and naturally, you are an unwitting conduit for those DNA coils trying to replicate themselves into the future. So that's it. End of story. Anything else is illusory. That's Richard Dawkins.
Yeah.
And so, there was so much of that going on. You want to read a story about what happens with guys when you put them on an island? the
Yeah.
Lord of the Flies.
Right. Yeah.
You know, if there's anybody there who's nice and gentle, they'll get excoriated and killed.
Mm.
So the whole, by the way, B.F. Skinner said that the most dangerous force in the universe is mother love. Just FYI. Well, Einstein said the most dangerous force in the universe is empowered mediocrity. And he spent all those years in the post office realizing the truth of that before he actually got his break. But I think that, the 20th century science was so pessimistic and so despairing about human nature. And Jane Goodall, who I really admired, she was one of the key people turning that around. And so whatever her parents did to raise her in Cambridge, I give them a lot of credit.
Yeah. And I also think we're going through our own version of the discounting of human intelligence, of human creative spirit, with the AI story and the narrative that we're all going to be put out of work and we're all going to have to go on UBI and we'll have to be sedated with, Netflix and free money. And I just think that vision, it completely, negates the power that each and every one of us has as human beings to create a future, with or without AI.
Yeah. So it may have some technical marginal uses, but nothing beyond that, because AI is not a venue for human love and affection. It is a calculating machine that can avail itself of pretty much everything that's on the worldwide net in a minute. And it can use it for good purposes or ill purposes. I'm glad that Google's getting sued because I think they need to pay attention to this. We had a story in the New York Post 2 months ago of a guy who was doing finance in New York. And he was really wrapped into his AI. And the AI suggested to him that he kill his mother and kill himself, which he did. So there's nothing to say that AI is benevolent. And that's a big problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's a big problem, but also the narrative we create around our response to it. Yeah.
Yes, very much.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
That may be not the best possible note to end on, but it does. Let's okay. Let's give you the floor. Is there a way to kind of conclude the message of the book? If you just summarize the message of the book for people, what would it be?
Well, the message really is about a future. I don't believe in New Ageism, but I believe that we are breaking through to an age of pure, unlimited love. For all the nastiness that's going on in our environment, all the conflict, all the confusion about culture and who we are, I do believe that there are wonderful breakthrough events occurring.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing. And so I'm optimistic about the future. Realistic, but also optimistic. And I like a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. This is my favorite quote. That's what I'll end on. The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. And you got to be a dreamer. You got to have dreamers.
Yeah. I love that. Yes. Wonderful. Okay. So for people, can you give them the URL for the Institute?
Yes. www.unlimitedloveresearch.org. And you can also go to Stephen with a PHEN, StephenGPost.com. unlimitedloveinstitute.com if you're interested. But unlimitedloveinstitute.org, and there are all kinds of websites there where you can, if you're so inclined, order a copy of Pure Unlimited Love, Science and the Seven Paths to Inner Peace.
We will put the links to both of those into the show description. Just leaves me to thank you, send you a huge wave of pure unlimited love from me to you.
I accept it. Okay.
And every single person listening or viewing, drink it in.
Okay.
Let's embrace the pure unlimited love. And thanks once again. What a message. Go out, buy the book, stick the charts on your wall. Yeah, please do. And thank you once again.
I appreciate being on your program. You do a beautiful job, Richard.
Thank you.